Okay, so here we are. We are recording. So today we are on the second lecture on negative punishment. So we talked about timeout as a procedure that involves, again, the removal of a reinforcer, or in that case, the reinforcing environment, to produce a future decrease in the problem behavior. Now, response cost is, again, a procedure that also relies on the principle of negative reinforcement. So here, response cost also, it's a procedure in which the problem behavior occurs, and what happens is that a specified amount of a reinforcer is removed or lost. Now, this is an interesting concept because it's not necessarily the reinforcer maintaining the problem behavior, but something that might be present in the environment that is valued. Now that thing can be removed, and if it does decrease the future likelihood of behavior, then you would see a decrease in the future frequency of behavior. So again, you will know that is response cost because problem behavior is reduced or decreased in its future frequency, right? So again, same principle, the principle of negative punishment that we discussed with timeout. So with timeout, you have problem behavior, then the individual is removed from the reinforcing environment, and here the reinforcer is removed from the individual. In a sense, the individual is experiencing a net loss of reinforcement in both response cost and timeout, and that is what essentially defines negative punishment, right? So you have some reinforcing stimulation, and that gets taken away either by removing the individual from the reinforcing stimulation, or removing the reinforcing sort of a stimulus from the individual. Both procedures work similarly, and they produce a result in the decrease in the future likelihood of behavior. Now, response cost, timeout, we've talked about timeout being probably quite popular with parents and schools. A lot of parents use timeout as a behavior management sort of procedure. But response cost not only is used by parents, but you see being used widely by governments, law enforcement, and so forth. So if you think about all the things that you're supposed to do, there's very little reinforcement for doing them, but there's lots of negative punishment in case that you engage in an alternative behavior, right? So if you don't submit your taxes by the deadline, that there's a fine, so money is taken away. Usually there are fines for almost everything, right? So if you go through the speed limit and get caught, there's going to be a fine. So money is going to be taken away from you. So all of these procedures are procedures that rely on negative punishment as a way to reduce the future likelihood of behavior. So if you speed and you get a ticket, the money is taken away, right? A lot of times people ask me this question. So if I'm speeding and I get a ticket, is this positive punishment because I didn't have a ticket and now I got a ticket, or is it negative punishment because money got taken away? I think it just depends a little bit on the level of analysis. You're correct that the ticket becomes an aversive stimulus, right? Because it's correlated with the loss of money. So you could interpret the ticket being something that got added. So, engage in problem behavior, and then you got the ticket, and you could define that as positive punishment, but it works in a way because money gets taken away. So I guess if you can argue either way. When you take 181, we'll discuss that the distinction between positive and negative, both reinforcement and punishment, sort of an arbitrary distinction. And there are many situations in which there's a gray area between what can be defined as positive, either punishment and reinforcement, or negative, right? So there's some examples they're like, it could be both, and it doesn't really matter if you define it as positive or negative. In some cases, it doesn't. But in this case, we can think about the primary behavior mechanism behind the procedure of response costs being the loss of a reinforcement. That's why behavior decreases in the future. I already talked about this. There's very little positive reinforcement. No one stops you when you're driving appropriately to tell you like, oh, thanks for driving through this, driving on the speed limit, or respecting the speed limit. No one stops you when you do something nice. When you have a full stop on the stop sign. You guys remember the example I gave in class about my rolling stop, in which I got stopped by a cop at Sac State because I didn't completely stop right before exiting the parking lot. But all the other times that I did stop before exiting the parking lot, I didn't really, there was no arbitrary consequence following my behavior. No one like waved or said, nice work with your full stop. But of course, the one day that I didn't stop fully, that's when I got caught. And of course, I didn't get a fine or anything. I got a warning, but it would have been associated with loss of money. I do have I just realized that I'm giving this example. I have a parking ticket from Sac State that I transfer my parking pass to my wife's car because she had to go to campus for some reason. And then the next day I drove to campus, and then I parked my car without the parking pass. And then of course I got a ticket. So, I owe some money to Sac State. Thought I was going to be able to, I don't know if I should have this on YouTube, but I will pay the ticket. Don't worry. So again, we gave some of those examples already. And money is often used as the response cost, but other reinforcers can be used. So, parents might remove like, hey, you're not going to be able to have your, Swedish fish or whatever, your snack, or I'm going to take the toy away, or the video game away, or if people use token systems, or stickers. I mean, typical kids usually use stickers, right? I've seen a lot of kids that get stickers, and if they accumulate a certain number of stickers, they can exchange for something. Well, stickers can also be taken away if you engage in some sort of problem behavior. So if you misbehave, well, I'm going to, the sticker you just earned for good behavior could be taken away. So, or the opportunity to use the car, or go to the movies, or go to a party, like all those things can be taken away. Now, when we talk about response cost, I think the same general notion that I discussed with timeout. Every time you're using some sort of punishment procedure, whether it's negative or positive, DRA or DRO should be used in conjunction, right? And when you're doing DRA or when you're doing DRO, remember with DRA, you're reinforcing the appropriate behavior. And it's differential reinforcement because you're differentially reinforcing appropriate behavior, but you are putting the problem behavior under extinction or under punishment contingency. So when the problem behavior occurs, you either don't provide the reinforcer, in which case it would be an extinction contingency, or the problem behavior may result, for example, in a timeout, or it may result in the removal of a reinforcer, in which case the DRA would be differential reinforcement of an alternative behavior with punishment. Normally, it is DRA is implied that extinction is occurring when the problem behavior occurs, but DRA can be used with punishment. Same with DRO. So if you have DRO, you're reinforcing everything but the problem behavior. Usually when problem behavior occurs, you reset the timer, but there might be that not only you reset the timer, but there might be some punishment contingency in place. So if the problem behavior occurs, then punishment would be implemented. In this case, we're talking about either response cost or a timeout, so negative punishment contingencies. Now, there are some considerations also when using response cost. And for example, which reinforcer will be removed? So again, depending on what behavior it is, you can really remove. So let's say problem behavior is maintained by attention. If the problem behavior occurs, well, not giving attention will be extinction. So what would response costs look like? You have to remove something that the individual is in possession of. So you have to remove something that is valued, and then that in which the removal will function as a form of punishment. So you have to have control over that reinforcer, right? So again, we talked about the example of the kid cursing while playing video games, And in the example we gave last week, mom may put the kid in timeout, so removing the kid from the reinforcing environment. But another option in terms of response cost, the mom could remove something else. Like what would you do if you're the mom? Like what could be removed? So playing video games and I curse, what can you remove that is valued at that situation? The video game, right? So the video game can then be removed contingent upon problem behavior. So like, well, now that you cursed, I'm going to take the video game away. So you won't have access to the video game for a brief period of time. So notice that the principle is the same. In the first case with timeout, kid is removed from the situation where video game is available, and in the second situation, the video game is taken away, right? So, but you can only do that if the change agent, in this case, the mom, has control over the reinforcer. In this case, she does, right? She has the ability to remove access from the video game. The quantity needs to be large enough. So imagine if I say, okay, you cannot play video game for a minute. Well, that might not be sufficient to reduce or to decrease the likelihood that problem behavior would occur again. So the quantity needs to be large enough, and that's usually an empirical question, right? So how long should the individual be, without that specific reinforcer? Well, long enough that you would see a decrease in the future likelihood of behavior. And again, you try to be as not as intrusive as you should. Just like timeout must be brief, response cost should also be brief, but it cannot be too brief that it will not produce a change in behavior. In some cases, the loss may be permanent, but in the majority of times, the loss is temporary, right? When I teach this class face-to-face, I will go to one of you who are sitting on the front row, and then I would say, hey, if you, let's imagine I would like to use response cost, and you answer a question incorrectly, maybe I'll ask you a very difficult question in which you wouldn't be able to answer, you would answer incorrectly, and then I'll take the phone away and say, okay, now this phone is mine. Now, in this case, it would be a permanent loss, which I don't think is feasible. I don't think I can go around stealing my students' phones. And of course, the majority of time, the loss is temporary. So, I mean, maybe you're texting during class. I'll be like, can you put your phone away? Or some teachers may take the kid's phone away during the class period. But of course, the kid will have access to the phone once class is over. And you may do the same thing. Parents may take the iPad away or things like that. And again, kid might have access to it later. And they might have access to it contingent upon appropriate behavior, which would be probably the smart thing to do. The reinforcer loss, there's also the possibility that it is delayed, right? If it is delayed, then you should have some indication of the loss. Like, for example, well, because you misbehaved, or because you came home late after your curfew, I'm going to take away your driving privileges. So you won't be able to borrow my car to go to the party tomorrow. So that would be an example of a car being removed, but not immediately after problem behavior occurred, a day later, a couple of days later. So in this case, if the response cost is delayed, it only works if your client or your participant or whoever you're dealing with is sophisticated enough to understand the reason why the item is being taken away. Because if the person cannot understand why the item is being taken away, it's okay as long as it is immediate, right? So if it is immediate, if the person cannot understand because doesn't have sophisticated language abilities, then response cost or any other behavior procedure would still work. It just has to be immediately. It has to follow behavior right away, right? But if you want to use any delayed consequences, then the person needs to understand what this consequence is being delivered for or removed for in this case. So usually the indicator becomes a condition punisher. So this is a perfect example of the ticket, right? So there was a so think about the slide that came right before. Let's see this one. So this one on the top right corner. I don't know if you can see, or if maybe my face is covering it, but on the top right corner, there's a picture of a windshield with this pink slit here, with this this ticket. Now, it's clear that if you park your car, go have a beer somewhere, when you come back, and if you see there's something on your windshield, we all get kind of like worried, right? I mean, I always get slightly anxious. Sometimes people put like advertisements or some, brochures, and I get anxious until I see it's a brochure. It's like, oh God, it's not a ticket, right? So if you think about it, there was no ticket on your windshield when you left, and now there's a ticket when you come back. So that's the addition of something, right? So there's something that got added. You could say that in this case, that piece of paper on your windshield is aversive. Why is it aversive? Because it has been paired with badness, right? It has been paired with something bad, with money being taken away from you. And that's why we're going to refer to that as condition punisher. So if you think about it, the response cost in this case is delayed, right? You have a deadline to pay the fee. So they might say you have 30 days or 60 days to pay the fee. I hope it's 60 days, because if it's 30 days, I'm probably behind on my ticket. But so you have 60 days to pay the fee. So the response cost is delayed, but notice that the consequence was actually immediate. I parked illegally, and then as soon as I came to my car, I got the ticket. And the ticket, again, is aversive, it's immediate, it's what we refer to as a condition punisher, right? So in this case, if delayed, it should be some indication of the loss, and the indicator of the loss, which in this case is the ticket, becomes a condition punisher. Just like condition reinforcers, we have condition punishers. If the individual has some form of, like I said, disability, in this case, ID means intellectual disabilities, or any form of language delay, then you would really want to be immediate, because they might not understand why the consequences, what the consequences for. This is a big one. So is the loss of the reinforcer ethical? So there are certain things that just cannot be removed in terms of human rights. You can't just say, well, you misbehave, so you're not going to get lunch, or I'm going to take away your meal. So you can't really use that as a way to violate the person's rights, or in a way that would result in any harm. So like I said, you can take away the video game, or you can take the snack, but you can't take away the child's main meal, for instance. Parents may take away possessions, but for example, group home employee cannot take clients' possessions and things like that. So there's a lot of ethical issues that involve what you can and cannot do. Like I mentioned, I cannot go around and take your personal possessions because you misbehave in class. So that's something I cannot do as a teacher. Is the response cost practical? So can you actually do it? And again, is it acceptable? Even if I could potentially go around and take people's possessions if they engage in problem behaviors during class. So maybe checking your Facebook, your Instagram, or whatever, and then I'm like, well, you can't do that. I'm going to take something away from you. Even if I could do that ethically, is it acceptable? Like, would you guys be comfortable with this? Would you guys be okay to have this kind of consequence? So I don't think so. Now, the interesting thing about it is that there has been some studies, and one study was actually conducted by one of our students, and it got published recently. It was one of Dr. Penrod's students, and I don't remember the details of the study, and I'm posting this on YouTube, so I could be incorrect completely on my analysis. But if I remember correctly, the student compared this group contingency. So she did this in a classroom with typical developing kids, and the kids had like some rules on what they had to do in terms of appropriate social behavior and inappropriate social behavior. And in one condition, they earned tokens or stars that could be exchanged for things. I don't remember what they were, but maybe like access to leaving early, or longer access to recess, or maybe some tangibles or not. And in another condition, they were exposed to a response cost procedure. So those tokens or stars got taken away if they misbehaved. So the question is, which procedure will be more effective, but also which procedure will be more acceptable by the kids? So at the end, would the kids choose to be on a positive reinforcement contingency, or would the kids be exposed to a response cost contingency? And if I'm not mistaken, the surprising result is that most kids chose the response cost contingency. So they actually prefer the situation in which things were being taken away if they misbehaved. Now, why do you explain those results? Like, why would kids choose a situation that is more aversive and probably not as pleasant? Um, I think that in this case, as with a lot of other studies that we've conducted, there is a factor here, which is their history. So if they had a long history in which teachers just punish their behavior when they misbehave, that might be the things that they're used to. So they will choose that by default. It's sad that they may have chosen the condition that is the most aversive, that produces some sort of emotional reaction. But hey, that it seems that in some cases people would choose what they're used to. Again, is the change agent capable, or can the change agent follow through? Can you actually take the item away? Is it possible to do it? Or if you say you're going to take it away, then you must take it away. You can't just threaten to take it away and not take it away, because then it's never going to work. It's like, well, Dr. Miguel always says that if I misbehave, he's going to do X, Y, and Z, but then he never does it. So it doesn't matter. Again, there are some situations where you don't want to stigmatize or embarrass the client either. So, if you're using response costs in a group home with a client or in a school, you don't want to do that in front of other people and stigmatize. Okay, so we have a student that posted a question or an example. She says, when my kids have a high value privilege removed for a period of time, they often ask if they could earn it back sooner by doing extra chores. I've always wondered if I'm undermining my own consequence by allowing them to work it off. No, I think that, similar to when we talked about, remember when we talked about timeout, that we said, you can have the timeout, and then usually going back into the timing could have what we call contingent delay, meaning if the problem behavior occurs, you don't get out, but you can also require some demands or some appropriate behavior to get out. So I think it's an empirical question. Does it work? So if you take something away and say, okay, you're not going to have access to your iPad for the next 15 minutes, but you can get it earlier if you do X, Y, and Z. So now you're using contingent response costs, in which you remove the iPad contingent on problem behavior, and you're also using now the same consequence, the iPad, contingent upon appropriate behavior. So you're actually doing some form of differential reinforcement, right? So you take away contingent on problem behavior, and then you can earn it back by engaging in appropriate behavior. But I would probably kind of come up with some sort of rule, like I'm going to take it away for 15 minutes, but you can get it 5 minutes earlier if you do X, Y, and Z, right? So as opposed to just like, oh, you can get it back right away if you do X, Y, and Z, because then they'll be like, oh, we can misbehave and she'll take it away, but then I can just do a couple of other things and then she'll give it back. So make sure that the things that they have to do are also meaningful, right? That they're just not too simple and so forth. But hopefully I answer your question there. Thanks for the question. Now, the other things that we have to consider. So if we're going to use a response cost procedure, it is best that functional assessment had been conducted. Remember, we do those punishment procedures when functional assessment has been done, functional-based interventions have been used, they were not effective. So hopefully you know what the function of the behavior is, and then desirable behaviors can be reinforced. So in the example that we just talked about, then the iPad can be used to reinforce desirable behaviors. And one thing to think about is, can you actually ask them to engage in the appropriate version of the problem behavior that the iPad got removed for? So if they engage in problem behavior, let's say, they cursed, or they engage in some sort of aggression. They were trying to ask something from their sibling, and then they pushed or pulled the item, and the person pulled the item and aggressed and so forth. You can remove something as a consequence. So use response cost. And then say, well, how about we practice engaging in the appropriate way of asking for what you want? And if you can do that, I can give you the item now, contingent upon that behavior. So you can do something like that, in which you can reinforce the desirable behavior, the desirable version of the problem behavior that you have consequated. You have to, of course, identify the reinforcer to be lost. We talked about that. We talked about decide whether the loss is permanent or temporary. Explain the procedure before implementing. So, I mean, again, if you're dealing with your kids, I'm sure that you tell them, like, if you do X, Y, and Z, those are the consequences. And then you can implement the response cost as soon as you can, so it's not as delayed. If it is delayed, then you want to kind of create some sort of symbol. Like, again, you can have a chart with stars or stickers, and then you earn stickers. But then if you engage in problem behavior, stickers get taken away, and that symbolizes the net loss of a reinforcer at the end. And of course, we talked about all the ethical issues regarding the loss of some of those reinforcers. And I can't stress this enough. We'll talk about the ethics of punishment in the next few classes. And any of those punishment procedures need to be practical, need to be acceptable. And in some cases, of course, you need consent to use it. There are some common errors here, just like with the timeout, there's some common errors in implementing response cost. And they're related to, again, if you threaten to take something away, but you don't, well, that could be a problem, right? Because then your description of what's going to happen means nothing anymore. People will just not listen to you. If you scold, nag, get angry as you implement the response cost, what's the problem with that? What could be potential side effect of engaging in all of those things contingent upon the problem behavior? Can anyone type something? Yeah, so you're getting attention, exactly. Thank you. So you get attention, and that could potentially reinforce the problem behavior, right? If the reinforcers are too delayed and the person doesn't understand why the reinforcer is taken away, that could be a problem too, because you could be punishing something else, right? So you punish whatever just preceded the loss of the reinforcer, and that could be a problem too. Again, you can have, you don't want to struggle with the child because now that involves physical harm, but also some potential attention as well. If it's a token economy, you have to be very careful about taking away more tokens that you deliver or that you can earn. Imagine you can earn 10 tokens to go to McDonald's, but then you engage in some problem behavior, and then 3 tokens get taken away, and now you have 7 tokens left, but there are no opportunities for you to earn those 3 tokens later. Maybe there's only 2 opportunities, so you can only earn up to 2 tokens. There's only 2 more opportunities for engaging in the appropriate way. So let's imagine, here's a scenario. Kid has to do 10 different chores, and then kid engages in problem behavior, loses 3 tokens, but now there's only 2 chores left. So the kid can only earn 2 tokens, meaning that even if the kid does everything she's supposed to and follow through, the kid is never going to get the ultimate reinforcer, which maybe is a trip to McDonald's, because only 9 tokens are going to be possible because 3 got taken away. There's only 2 possible things the kid can do. So why would the kid do those 2 things? The kid would just start like, screw it, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to go play outside, and I'm not going to, complete those 2 chores, because if I do it and I get those 2 tokens, nothing's going to happen because you already took 3 tokens away. So you need to remember that when you come up with your token system, that there's always a way for the participant to achieve the ultimate consequence, right? So if you take tokens away, there has to be opportunities to earn them back. And again, make sure that there's no, reinforcement loss that could be unethical. So now that we talked about response costs, and I'll give some opportunity for you guys to ask some questions, let's compare the 3 reduction procedures that we talked about so far in terms of what happens contingent upon problem behavior. The first one was extinction, right? So with extinction, you find out what the reason or the reinforcer for the problem behavior is. You do your functional analysis, your functional assessment. Let's say problem behavior occurs because every time problem behavior occurs, it produces attention or a social form of positive reinforcement. Then what would extinction look like? Well, problem behavior occurs, and then it shouldn't produce the reinforcer anymore. So the reinforcer for the problem behavior is no longer delivered contingent upon the problem behavior. So you eliminate that consequence. I always like to say that with extinction, the behavior is broken, it no longer produces the reinforcer. Then you have timeout, which we talked about last class. Now, timeout, the person is removed from all sources of reinforcement or from the reinforcing environment, again, immediately after problem behavior occurred. So problem behavior occurs, and then the person is removed from the reinforcing environment. And then with response cost, again, problem behavior occurs, and then immediately after, a reinforcer is removed, but not the reinforcer maintaining the problem behavior, something else, right? So a different reinforcer is removed. Again, the example would be if problem behavior is maintained by attention, then extinction will be I don't give attention anymore. Timeout will be problem behavior occurs, I remove the person from the reinforcing environment. And again, I am it's not very functional because the reinforcing environment may have nothing to do with the reason why the problem behavior occurred in the first place. The same with the response cost. So even if the behavior is maintained by attention, the kid is engaging problem behavior to get attention. If the kid engages in problem behavior, I might take the iPad away. So notice that taking the iPad away has nothing to do with the reason why the behavior was occurring in the first place, but it might still work because the iPad is valued, problem behavior occur, and then something that is valued is taken away. So you can see why extinction is functional based. It addresses the function of the behavior, it addresses the consequence maintaining the behavior, but timeout and response costs do not, or at least don't have to. And that's why those are not function-based strategies, right? You're dealing with other reinforcers that you're manipulating here and not necessarily the reinforcer maintaining the problem behavior. So let's look at the an example here so we can come up with some solutions. So this is an example of Joey, and Joey engages in plays with various toys and crafts at a table with other preschoolers. The reinforcers in this environment include toys, crafts, attention from adults, in this case the teacher, and attention from other children. So toys are reinforcing, the attention from the adults and the attention from the peers. Now, when Joey engages in aggression in the classroom, the teacher explains to Joey why his behavior is not good, hugs him, and tells him to play nicely. And then this happens every time Joey engages in aggression, suggesting that if we were there to observe and do a functional assessment and take data on ABC, we would always see like, okay, A is like Joey's playing, B, he engages in aggression, C, the teacher comes, explains why he shouldn't do this and gives him a hug. Now, without even having to do a functional analysis, what do you think? Why do you think Joey is engaging in problem behavior? What do you think has served as the reinforcer for problem behavior in this case? Yep, the attention from the teacher, in this case, in the form of physical attention, right? The hugs, maybe the explanation, and so forth, right? So this may be the reason why Joey is engaging in problem behavior. Now, how would the teacher implement extinction? Can anyone tell me? Type on the chat box. So what would you do? So if Joey engages in problem behavior, what should the teacher do? No, this is extinction, not timeout. No timeout yet. So just extinction. So in this case, do not provide attention to the problem behavior. Exactly. So you would ignore Joey immediately after he aggresses, no attention, no hugs, nothing. So this would be pure extinction, right? Now, why would this work? Well, because now problem behavior no longer produces the consequence, and we should see a decrease, gradual decrease in the problem behavior. Remember, it's gradual because there might be an extinction burst, right? The kid might engage in all sorts of different behaviors to get the hug. Hug will never come, and then behavior will go down. Probably not the best treatment, exactly for the reason that I mentioned. You may see problem behavior go up before it goes down. How about timeout? Some of you already said that. You would then remove Joey from the table and maybe put him in a chair in a different room. So if he's in a different room, what kind of timeout is that? What is it called? Does anyone remember? If he's in a different room, type on your chat box. Exclusionary, correct. And if Joey's just put on a chair, but he can see all the other kids playing, what is that one called? Type on the chat box. Inclusionary, yeah. Or non-exclusionary. All of those terms would work. All right, so why would it work? Again, because you had negative reinforcement procedure, right? So you have the reinforcing environment. Remember, we said that he liked the crafts, he liked the attention from the peers, he liked the toys that he was playing with. Well, now he's not going to get any attention from the peers, he's not going to get any of the toys. How about response cost? How would you implement response cost? Yep, you would remove the toys. So you will engage in problem behavior, and then contingent on problem behaviors, you can remove some of the reinforcer that he already possesses, the toys or the crafts or anything like that. And it would work the same way as timeout, a negative punishment procedure. So he has something that is valued, he engaged in the problem behavior, that something gets taken away. Yeah, so this is all I had for today. So it's a little shorter lecture. Questions about extinction, timeout, or response cost, or anything about the parameters of using response cost? What I'll do is I will, if there are no questions, what I'll do is I'll stop the recording. I'll stay here for a few more minutes in case that you guys have any other questions for me. Again, I'd like to thank all of those who joined live. And as I was mentioning earlier, I'm in a different environment today. I have this cool painting behind me. So I'm gonna shout out to one of my colleagues who's a painter here in Sacramento. Some of you may have heard of him. His name is Jose de Gregorio. That's one of his paintings. He's famous for painting a lot of geometric patterns. And Jose, this is one of his paintings from before he started the geometric patterns. And we know Jose as well too, Sydney. So I got this painting a few years ago in his studio. He doesn't do this painting anymore. Yeah, so I always like to feature some of the paintings that we have in the house, and that's one that I really like. If no other questions, again, thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm gonna stop the